So, but I wanted to do a talk on AcroCorinth. We're on our way. You can see it off there over there, up to your left. But AcroCorinth is just the short name for Acropolis Corinth. Acropolis is what we call a settlement built on high ground. So you have the Acropolis of Athens. We're going to the Acropolis of AcroCorinth, and it started out as a Greek Acropolis during the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period was, for us, that's the period mostly when the Apocrypha was written, between the Old Testament and the New Testament, from 323 BC to either 27 or 31, depending on different scholars, when the Roman Empire started. The Roman Empire was what we're mostly interested in because that's the New Testament. That's when Jesus was born. That's when the church flourished in the first century. And then after the Roman Empire ended in 476 officially the Roman Empire ended, but then about 330 AD is when you've heard this name Byzantine Empire, and that's the Eastern Roman Empire, kind of a little bit of an overlap historically, and that the capital of the Eastern Byzantine was Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul. And that's important because we're going to see a lot of ruins from the Byzantine period. Actually, the first wall that you see out there is Byzantine. But AcroCorinth is such an amazing thing. If you are able to get to the top, it's really, I can't wait to see the whole, we got to see a little bit of a canal, but from the top, AcroCorinth is built on, the elevation is called a monolith. It's kind of like Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar in the UK. We're on the border of Spain. This is a little bit taller than the Rock of Gibraltar. And because of its strategic location, you can only access it by foot on the western slope, which we'll be walking up for those who can. And the rest of it, only unless you were an experienced mountaineer with ropes and spikes could you get up. And then at the top, there's the upper Pyrene Spring, which gave it a good water supply. So you can imagine that it was a very good strategic military outpost because of its height, because of its access, because of the water supply. And you can see it. The AcroCorinth, because of its strategic location, not only can it can see people coming in from the Mediterranean Sea, from the canals, from the slopes, held many sieges up in the AcroCorinth. The castle that we're going to see has been around for 2,500 years. The foundation was during that Hellenistic period. Hellenistic is just Greek influences before the Roman Empire, BC. And we will see there are some, the upper Pyrene Spring, the canal, if we get that far out, is right behind the highest point, where you'll see some of those ancient ruins. And also there's 3 walls. First, it was a Greek Acropolis, and then it was a Roman, during the Roman Empire, became a Roman citadel. Citadel is just a fortified city or a castle within. And then during the Byzantine, it really became a fortress, which is what we're going to see now, these 3 sets of walls. The first wall during the 14th century, the second wall was mostly the Venetians, and then the third wall, you'll see part of it is during that Byzantine period. The Byzantine period is when Christianity became the official state religion. And we'll see a lot of this history. And the history, Doug probably went over some of this history for Corinth. And if you remember, in 146, Lucius Mummius came in, the Roman general, totally flattened Corinth. And from 146 to 44, pretty much Corinth and the AcroCorinth remained desolate, except for a few settlers here and there. And it wasn't until Julius Caesar replanted it and founded it as a Roman colony, which was very advantageous for Paul, the Apostle Paul, because he was a Roman citizen. And as a Roman citizen, you get perks in a Roman colony. You got legal perks, you got financial perks, and really helped Paul become the perfect person to evangelize this area for multiple reasons. So in 44, but the most important part, Roman colony was planted in 44, and almost 100 years later, and the spring of 52 AD is the most popular time for when the Apostle Paul came and planted the church in Corinth, which is what is most important to us. And we can see why Paul was the most perfect person. when you go up to the AcroCorinth, if you can make it to the top and you see the vantage point, the viewpoint from the city, you will see what Doug described. We just saw the canal, which was made on the isthmus. It's about a 4.5 mile, well, the actual canal is probably about 4 miles. And then you see the Corinthian Gulf that leads out to the western, the Adriatic Sea, goes to Rome and Italy, and then the eastern part going out, the Saronic Gulf going out to the Aegean Sea and off to Asia and Jerusalem. So you have this isthmus connecting the two worlds. So Corinth was perfect. And when you get up to that vantage point, you see all of this. So when you're reading the scriptures, you see this as being this diverse. You have the Romans, which were the highest in the pecking order because it was a Roman colony. Then you have Greek because it was a Greek civilization. And then, of course, the Jews, which came from the east, from Jerusalem. But then in what we read in the scriptures in Acts 18, when Priscilla and Aquila came, they were from Rome. They were Jews from Rome when Claudius expelled the Jews. He did that a couple different times. And about 49 AD was when Priscilla and Aquila came over to be part of Corinth. So you had you had a strong Jewish group, but then you had the Greeks, but Paul, being a Roman citizen, being a Pharisee, but the other thing that Paul had going for him that the Greeks would really love is that he was a great orator, and Greeks loved oration. So he was the perfect apostle to come, and several times during the Bible you'll see that it wasn't Paul's plan to come to Corinth. When in Acts 16 you see the Holy Spirit stopped Paul from going and evangelizing the rest of Asia. So they went from Troas over to Philippi and ended up in Macedonia, and then from Philippi came down to Corinth. And then when he's in Corinth, God had to tell him, no, don't go, Paul. I have many people here for you, in which he does. He stays for the 18 months and helps start this church that ended up flourishing in Corinth. Now, there's several legends that you'll learn about the AcroCorinth coming up here. In Greek mythology, when Apollos and Poseidon, Apollos was the god of sun and light, and then you have Poseidon, the god of sea, horses. They were fighting over the isthmus, where we just saw the canal built on the isthmus. And they were fighting over it. Apollos won the AcroCorinth, Poseidon won the isthmus. So Apollos actually owned the AcroCorinth. And there's several other, like Pegasus. You probably heard of Pegasus. When Pegasus stamped his foot at the top of AcroCorinth, he made the Pyrene Spring. And another part of the history of Greek mythology that we'll see with the Pyrene Spring is the Zeus, the god of gods in Greek mythology, actually abducted and ravished a goddess named Aegeon. And Aegeon's father was Asopus, who wanted to find out who it was who abducted his daughter. So Sisyphus, who's it was a Greek god who's known for his deceit. But he says, I won't tell you who ravished your daughter, abducted your daughter, until you give me the spring of Pyrene. So it was given from Asopus to Sisyphus so that he could learn where his daughter was. So I'm just so grateful that we have a God that is not like us. But you can see in Greek mythology, some of these Greek myths, they think and act like us. We can understand why, because they were made. But it's interesting to know some of that history. But I think the most important part, which I'm super excited, again, is that vantage point of seeing the history from the top of the AcroCorinth, if you can, you can see the geographical advantage from up there to see how we have this multicultural city of Corinth. And then, again, as you're coming in through these three walls and seeing some of the history, you get in there. Oh, and another important thing that happened during the Byzantine period. So Byzantine, again, after the Roman Empire, started about the Byzantine period started about 330 AD, when Christianity became tolerated in 330 AD. It became the official state religion in 380 AD. During that period, they enjoyed the fruits of having Christianity, less persecution for the Christians, but they could never have understood what was about to happen. Because of the AcroCorinth and the strategic location, they were able to fight off the Muslim Turks for many, many years, but they never expected what was going to happen in the early 13th century. What happened was during the Fourth Crusade, the Christians from the West Crusades, their plan was to come and overtake Jerusalem from the Arabs in the early 13th century. Instead, they went over to Constantinople, which was the capital of the Eastern Empire. They sacked it. Then they came down south to Corinth. They took over Corinth, and then they went to the AcroCorinth. And they couldn't, because of the strategic location, they couldn't just go up the AcroCorinth. So what they did is they laid a siege for 4 years. They tried to wait them out at the AcroCorinth for 4 years. And the AcroCorinth was being defended by an independent Greek lord, Leosagoras. And Leosagoras, what happened was inside the walls of the AcroCorinth, he went mad and actually mounted a horse, galloped over the walls, over the cliffs of the AcroCorinth to his death. But the Greeks held on to the AcroCorinth for 2 more years. So they laid siege for 6 years. But in 1210, the Western Franks, the Crusaders from the Fourth Crusade, actually overtook AcroCorinth. The Corinth Byzantines took it back, 1395, but they were weakened by the Crusades. So the Ottoman Turks finally came in this, and then overtook. In 1453, they overtook Constantinople, came down south, and laid another long siege at the AcroCorinth. And in 1458, they overtook the Corinth. And then after that, it was back to the Venetians, and then the Ottomans took it back. And then finally, in the War of Independence in 1821, finally came back to the Greeks. So interesting history. But again, I think seeing the vantage point and seeing why we have such a multicultural... Oh, and at the very tip, at the very top of the AcroCorinth, during the Hellenistic period, when pagan religion was in Greece, is the Temple of Aphrodite. And there are some large stones and one column left from the temple. And at this temple, it's rumored that 1,000 sacred prostitutes work there. Recent scholars suggest that it perhaps was a bit exaggerated, that mostly sacred prostitution was mostly Eastern, not Greek. But we do know during the Isthmian Games, which you probably learned from Doug, which they had every 2 years down in the Isthmus, one of the athletes said, if I win this, then I will dedicate 100 girls to Aphrodite. So certainly there was some of that going on. But so during the Hellenistic period, at the very top summit, about 1883 feet, 574 meters high, they made this temple. And then during the Byzantine period, it became a church. And then when the Ottoman Turks came, they made it into a mosque. So we'll see, when you go in the Acropolis, you'll see all evidence of all different parts of history. You go in, you see the different walls from the different periods. You get in, you'll see a Muslim mosque. And then you go in further, you get to see some of the ancient ruins from the Hellenistic period. So it's really a great history lesson, and as well as biblical lesson, just being able to see the vantage point, especially seeing all the different people coming from all the... I love they probably explained this, Doug did in his talk, the canal that we see here now was just made in the last century, but back then it was the Diocos, and you can just see that isthmus and imagine the ships going across on wheels, being rolled over, mostly probably by some slaves, some freedmen that had come here to Corinth. So I'm excited. Again, if you can and are able to make it to the summit, it is worth the trip, I hear.
Connection. And why it is that down here on the Peloponnese Peninsula, Corinth was such an important spot. It's the pinch point here between the two land masses, the upper land mass where Athens is, and down here in Corinth. And as we look at that, you can see what a small little bit of land that is. They tried to build a canal across that during Nero's time in 67 with the slaves that were taken out of Jerusalem from the revolt, as Vespasian was down there waging war, which would end in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. That canal was finally completed by the French much later in the 1900s. But in ancient times, they regarded it as a sacred area, not to be altered in landmass by the humans, because it was put there by the gods, and so it remained one landmass. And the ships would be brought across either on rails, or their cargo would be unloaded, disembarked, and then reloaded to another ship on the other side. Wow. And that's the little land area, the isthmus.
Yeah.
That's that bridge that we were on, right?
Yes.
The two great bodies of water, the Aegean and the Ionic, or the Adriatic and the Aegean seas,
Certainly.
connecting the way to Europe and the way to Asia, all through here.